This is Carol Stimmel in the Engerati studio at European Utility Week 2015. This morning we're talking with a group of experts about disruptive utility business models. So I'm with Gitte, Adrian, Michael, and Harald, and let's just go around and briefly introduce ourselves properly, and then we'll jump right into this topic. Gitte.
Yeah, I'm Gitte from Danish Utility, Energimidt is it called, and we work with both the DSO activities, the commercial market about selling photovoltaics, heat pumps and so on, and in the trade market, and we also is a fiber broadband company. And I work with strategic business modeling in all the areas.
Okay, great. Adrian.
My name's Adrian Tuck. I'm the CEO of Tendril, which is a consumer engagement software company. We've mainly up until now operated in North America, but are just entering the European market this year.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. My name is Michael Körber. I'm managing partner and attorney of MPW, and we are consultants who are focused on the market of energy efficiency service companies, and we have different approaches. We are attorneys, tax advisors, public accountants, engineers, and consultants, so we create the whole package for business models in the market of energy efficiency services.
Okay, great. And Harald?
And my name is Harald Överholm. I'm one of the founders of Eneo, and Eneo is essentially one of the first solar third-party ownership companies in Europe. So what that means is that we build rooftop solar. We also own our assets, and we essentially sell the electricity, the solar electricity, back to the building owner. So making life very easy for end customers of solar.
Okay, great. So I'm not kidding anybody. You know, I've been in this industry for 10 years, 11 years now. We've been talking about disruptive business models for over a decade now. We've called it all sorts of things like the utility graveyard spiral, but nobody really knew what that was or what form it was going to take. And we just kept moving electrons, just kept moving it, looking for safety, quality, reliability. But then all of a sudden some market players started moving in and then moving out and then moving in, such as Google, for example. That's quite a force. And they started testing the energy market, and again we were wondering what's going to happen. But there hasn't been a lot of clarity until about a year ago when we started talking about the services market, energy services. But again, it's come up in almost every conversation I've had here the last 2 days. And there's not a lot of clarity about it. So I'm hoping today in our conversation we can put a little bit of shape around not just what energy services really means to the industry, but how we're going to derive value from it, both for the vendors, the utilities, and the consumer as well. So what do you think? When you think of energy services, what are you thinking about in your positions strategically, which is your perspective?
Yeah. What we mostly talk about in my company is the security and supply, actually, because in Denmark we have this target that we want to have a fossil-free society in 2050, and all these renewables coming in. We have a lot of wind turbines already in Denmark. It gives a lot of unbalances in the grid, and how do we secure the supply, and how do we use electricity when it's there and not when we really need it. So we're talking a lot about not the smart grid actually, but the smart energy, and about electrification. How do we encourage people to use electricity instead of using biomass or diesel oil or coal or anything like that. So it's much about how do we get people to buy photovoltaics, to buy batteries, to buy heat pumps. How do we encourage industries, the public sector to change when and how they use energy actually.
Right, so it sounds like you want to see a breakthrough of products and services that are going to ensure reliability of the grid under a renewables scenario, renewables generation
exactly.
scenario. Okay,
Yes.
so well, you're more on the customer side, right?
Yeah,
Adrian?
that's right. So if I took the customer perspective, today we see this sort of move to personalization, to move from a kind of one-size-fits-all for energy that everybody gets the same thing for the same price, to one where people can take solar as a service from the roof, where people might choose to have a fixed bill or bundle their energy costs alongside a purchase of insulation or new smart thermostats and other things to change the way that they buy energy. Not everybody will take advantage of it straight away, but I think there are enough people now who've seen this kind of model emerge with other service providers, from banking to telco and so on, in their lives that they're looking for this from their energy suppliers, and so we see that movement taking hold.
Okay, great. So this is starting to see the grid more as a single machine or a single entity from generation to the point of consumption, it sounds like.
Correct.
Do you agree with that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. We believe that every utility has to write a new story around their business models. So they have to go through an evolution with maybe hardly a revolution. And yesterday I heard a person from Petrol, and they already started some years ago go through this evolution, and they created their own business models from a gas station to a now it's a new term, a multi-utility mobility environmental service company. So they have a 360-degree service around for their customer and to the advantage of the customer, because the customer doesn't want to buy electricity or buy gas and get a bill in kilowatt hours, because that is not what they want or need. They want to watch TV, they want to have their apartment heated or cooled, and regarding the creation of the bill, that is what I want to pay for.
Right, so you're starting to get into the economic piece of it too, which I think we should talk about in a little bit as we move towards value. What is your perspective on the services market in general?
What I think is so amazing at this point is the pull factor, I think, from customers. So I'm going to come back to the customer perspective. That the only reason why we exist as a company is that because customers out there, people who own buildings, people who use buildings, they want solar panels on the roof, and they want it as a service because they don't have the time to understand it. So there's a genuine pull factor. It's just a free market thing. People want something, and then people like us will come in and deliver it. And this, I think, is the amazing perspective in all of this. Then you see, of course, a lot, especially from the utility side, you see people kind of wanting to deliver new services and more of a push factor saying, we should have this, or we should try this. I mean, that's really interesting, and that might lead to things in the future, but I think what's really happening here now is that customers they want things, and those things will be delivered either by the utilities or by people like us, of course.
All right, so that's an interesting point. So we have this idea: if we build it, they will come, or they'll come and then we'll start building it. There's been a lot of confusion about that, I think, because we didn't really know what we should be doing, and the early attempts to sort of animate customer interest have been sketchy at best. Really, there hasn't been a good maybe standard way to approach it, or some problems with regionalisms, the difference between North America and Europe at a very kind of gross level. But you made the point very clearly that now we need to do this with the distributed generation, especially we need to figure out how to get consumers to embrace these energy products and services just for grid reliability, and that's really the difference now. I think I hear you saying. Is that what you're experiencing?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And at the moment, actually, we have a project ongoing in a small island where we have installed photovoltaics, and then we have given them some batteries. And what is interesting there, I think, is that they really are very caring about that they consume only when they have production in their battery. They have a storage there, and they start moving things around. And that's exactly what we want them to do. But actually the idea was that, the reason why they got these batteries was because they didn't want to sell electricity to the grid, but sell to a lower price and then buy it back for a higher price. But now when they have the batteries, they start moving their behavior, so it starts balancing the grid actually by themselves, because they want to be self-sufficient, and that is kind of interesting.
That's a big difference. Well, Adrian, that leads me to you, because I think you mentioned in the beginning you're just now moving into the European market. I guess, do customers actually really care about energy? Like, I'm not convinced. I've never been convinced.
The list of things I don't yet know about the European market is still quite long. So let me start with that. But I would say, well, here's what we've learned so far. Much like North America, if you treat customers as an amorphous mass, you will conclude that there's little average interest on a day-to-day basis in their energy consumption. It's relatively cheap and reliable, and not too many people think about it every day. But then if you actually parse that apart, you find that there are people who are very concerned about it for environmental reasons, and they start to make decisions about alternative suppliers and sources and services. And then you have people who are very, very concerned from a financial perspective. And then you have people who just like new gadgets and new things and want to change the way that they do things. And so there's a lot of interest. It's not a uniform interest. And the great thing that I'm seeing in the European markets is because they have, by and large, more competition in them than North American markets from a retail supply perspective, the market is adapting faster. And in the US, we see the majority of the market owned and controlled by some highly regulated players who do lots of good things well, but they don't innovate well. They innovate as a response to changes in regulation or customer demand, and occasionally competition from new market entrants like solar players. Over here, it seems that there's a freer way in some of the European markets for new players to enter and challenge the status quo, and I think we'll see some exciting stuff over the next few years.
I mean, you touched on the lack of innovation, which, let's follow the money, right? So that's a lack of dollars put into research on that side. So I want to follow up on something you said, Harald, about you really feel like the customers are ready and that they're here, but Adrian made the point that not all customers are the same. So who are these customers you're talking about that are here
of course, I think this is very true, and this is one of the beauties of being a startup, right? Because we can search out those customer niches that are really ready for our product. If you sit at a utility and you want to design a new product, you're probably thinking, look, what can I do for all of my customers that everyone will like? We don't have to think that way. So, and much as Adrian said, exactly those two groups. I mean, some people are very, very concerned about giving money away to the utility today. They want to lower costs, or they want to lock in costs. And then you have the other group who are really concerned about their general environmental profile. They might also sometimes be people who are not that concerned about the environmental side, but they're very concerned about being sort of ahead of the time, ahead of the curve. They want to be new, really be seen to be doing the latest things and understand those things. So you have those two groups, and they're very keen. And then of course you have a big mass in the middle, much as with any new product. And that might come. I mean, once they see these early customers adopt these things, they will come. But certainly for us, we have more than enough to do. So
something
I think
to do
it's
now. Well, yeah, Michael, you first cracked open this can of kind of the value and the economics of that. So I wanted to hear what everybody had to say so that you could sort of tell us what you think about it. Do you agree with this perspective?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we have to differentiate between the customers' sectors. The housing sector has a great or a very huge economic pressure to reduce costs. And if you look in the industry, there's the same regarding that every produced unit has to be as cheap as possible. And there are other interests in regarding energy efficiency services than if you have interest regarding your profile regarding alternative scenarios regarding how the energy is produced. So the solar panel theme has this kind of spirit of I have to change the world in order to make it better, and this is another driver that is in the industry, for example, or in the housing sector.
Well, one conversation I think we really have to be done with in this industry is the conversation about utility fear of new business models. It just has to be, especially because of the points you raise, it's really an imperative now that we figure out how to work in this distributed model, not just from a grid balancing perspective, but also just for our businesses to survive and thrive. So,
but the interesting thing when you have discussions with the utilities is I think for the most case that's really, really clear at the top. So
right.
If you talk to the C-suite, you really understand that these people have grasped the sort of existential threat that they face related to this change. It's less clear the further down the organization you go. So I often work where I meet visionary leaders who have a plan, and then by the time that plan gets to something that's going to be implemented, all of the risk has been managed out of it, but so has
Right.
all the opportunity. And so it becomes this small scale thing, not moving at anywhere near the pace that needs to happen. And
Yeah.
the challenge for today's utility leaders is not actually to recognize they need to change, it's to drive the change in their own organization. Culture is the biggest impediment to change here, not laws, not technology, culture.
Well, so how do we get there? So in the United States, we all knew, and well, there's been lots of talk about what's been happening in New York, right? I happen to live in New York, so I'm pretty familiar with the fact that the governor showed up and said, "That's it.
Yeah.
You know, we're doing stuff differently," and there's been a lot of consternation, but it's going to happen because of these soft pedaling. And I just had a conversation with an engineer from last week from a major utility who is in charge of getting these technologies into the grid, and he does precisely what you say. By the time he's done with your technology, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
You might even quit and give up altogether. So how do we change this culture? Because as we've all agreed here, this has to happen. We've just talked about the value and the benefits and how the economics can work, although we talked about it briefly, it's there. So what do you think? You look unsure.
No, I'm just, you're perfectly correct. In our house, we call these guys the cable mafia because they're just so conservative, just don't want to change anything because they want to have the switches, not the digitization of the grid, because they don't know how to, is it secure, what is the risk, and all kinds of stuff like that. But I think that time will solve it for us, because they will change their mind. They will start to learn that we need to use these software systems to manage all the grid. A new SCADA system is coming in, and it's a slow process moving forward. Very slow.
Very slow.
Very slow, actually.
But if our backs get against the
we
wall,
push them, and we start doing these funded projects, trying to do some pilots, try to make them feel secure when they do something different in a smaller part of the grid, so they can feel safe when we start doing this. So I think it has to be smaller steps, and to have deeply respect of what they are doing, because they're securing their supply every day, any minute, and they still need to do that. But they're very conservative.
yeah, Michael, you must have an opinion on that.
I think we have to modify the process how creating business models is going on today, because you said that it's culture and not only law, but I think in the EU the law is a barrier for innovative business models, because the utilities are afraid of creating innovative business models because of the regulatory framework that does not allow those models. And yesterday I talked to a person from a utility from the US, and they said we make the other way around. We create a business model, then we go to the regulatory framework and say we need that and that and that to get this in the market. And I think the market participants in the EU should be more confident to say what they need to create their business models and to get innovative in the market and get this disruptive moment in the market.
Well, Harald, Harald, you're kind of an upstart here. Like, are you banging your head against this yet?
Sorry?
Are you banging your head against these issues, or how are you
definitely, and especially this whole issue about the utilities and how can they change or not. I mean, we often want to talk to the utilities. We want to have a conversation with them because we share so many things and we can learn from them, and we could even do things together. But we have exactly this problem that when we might meet a CEO, he says, we should be talking, but as soon as we start talking to the organization, we can tell how they're basically just trying to use that conversation to come up with something that might hurt us. And that ties into what Michael is saying, because I agree with this. It's a highly regulated area, right? The utilities knows this. So for utilities today, one of the key problems they have and we have is that as soon as they do something or we do something, there's always the risk that one of us will go to the regulators and say, look what they're doing. I mean, this might not be right.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's a bit of I can feel sometimes a bit of a culture of not wanting to share, not wanting to discuss new things, because you're so worried that someone will go to the regulator and make it stop. And of course, that's very negative, and it's not constructive at all. But that's the truth sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's Adrian's. I know Tendril works with some of the biggest and therefore some of the most complex, and I've got to imagine difficult utilities to work with in terms of things to jump through. But one of the points you raised was about this trust and comfort, which makes me worry about the age of the perpetual science experiment, which you've also touched on. So how do we get around the constant demo pilot? How do we get to deployment?
I mean, for us, it's been, we spend as much time choosing our customers as they do choosing us, because we've recognized over the decade that we've been in this business that our ability to move the boulder up the hill when it doesn't want to be moved is fairly limited. And so we tend to spend a lot of time trying to understand the motivation of the team that we're working with and assessing whether this is really what we're doing with them is a prelude to a larger deployment, or it's a test for the sake of a test sort of thing. And we got that wrong early in the company. We weren't sophisticated enough, and now we're very rigorous about that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is that we've started, although we have a lot of big established customers, our growth at this point is coming from challenger brands, whether that's challenger energy retailers in places like Europe, or solar companies and so on, who are really challenging the status quo, and we're seeing more growth and more opportunity in those areas at the moment, and that fits our sort of ethos quite well.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the levers. So we've got the regulators, we've got the residential customers, the commercial and industrial customers. We have the Googles and the other players coming from the outside, the solar providers. I mean, there needs to be some coordination here. Who are the parties now? It's not even clear as we start changing models around the world. Who's in charge of this thing now? Like, I mean, how are we going to move this forward? You mentioned this Sisyphean rock moving up the hill. I don't think we have time for that with the penetration of renewables and distributed generation growing like it's growing. So, how do we move this forward in some sort of a coordinated fashion? I've stumped everybody.
I don't know. Does it ever happen that way? I mean, maybe we just need maybe Harald needs to be our Uber in this space, right? He needs to build a business that's so disruptive that everybody then has to react to this thing and say, okay, we have to change the laws because this new combination of technology and business model turned up.
I'll buy that. That was exactly the wrong question. And maybe that's the problem, right? Who's in charge here? So, okay, nobody's in charge. Maybe it's the collaborative sharing economy we need to be asking.
Well, I think it's really, I mean, it's the $1 million question, right? But you
get $2 million these days. I like
Well, in Denmark we try at the moment to change the regulation actually, because we have a benchmarking system that is a barrier for doing any smart grid systems. And we need to do these smart grid systems to handle all the renewables. But we are trying to push our energy association and our energy department at the ministry to change the regulations, because this is just a barrier.
So we have smart energy and smart resistance, it sounds like. So
you mentioned something that I like, which is you talked about New York. I spent a lot of time in the US understanding the US market for solar. And they kind of moved ahead of us, right? So the US now is at a point where Europe hasn't been. And because of that, we have conversations both in California and in New York that I think are very exciting. I mean, it's about how can the utilities and the new aggregators work together, what's the role of the regulator. Maybe we should listen more to that. Maybe we should recognize that there's a lot of things to be learned from the US today. Because I think especially in New York now with the New York Rev, I think the new initiative is called, a lot of interesting things being said there. So.
Yeah, actually what a lot of that comes down to is financing schemes. So, which is almost a tacit agreement that the technology's there. In fact, some people say the technology there, the business model's there, we just haven't figured out the glue. So maybe I'm a slow learner, as Adrian just pointed out. And wouldn't be the first time. So we have been asking the wrong question, really. And the premise of today's conversation, which is just now coming to an end, was about disruptive business models. So when you suggested we perhaps need an Uber of energy, you know, they just did their thing. They just started doing their thing. And then as the market, as you pointed out, is moving that way, the pressures are there. We've enumerated many levers. So this is going to happen, and we just have to keep innovating in our areas of specialty and find creative ways to stay in business until we start putting them together. I mean, I think that's the trick, and I know you know that's true, and you know, a very good insights. Nice balance of people weighing in here. Any parting shots from anybody? We have about 1-2 minutes left. I've tired you all
I
out.
think the most important thing is to get the dialogue, or to keep the dialogue alive between market players and the regulators, and to get like a regulatory framework that is able to enable the market of energy efficiency services and more value services around it. I think it's not to give up, and we have to keep the dialogue alive between the ones who are in charge.
Right, and I think the key is animation, orchestration, and really thinking of the grid as a single machine now to get away from what you identified as these silos, these terrible, terrible silos. So.
Yeah, I want to weigh in on that. And from the side of regulators, in Europe especially, remember that if an industry is changing, I mean, just follow the change. I mean, there's no point in trying to hold back. There's no point in trying to protect certain sectors. But regulators should now see that there are more actors than utilities active in the area, and that's probably a good thing, right? I mean, let's be optimists. There's technological change.
I agree, yeah.
That's probably a good thing. I mean, it's built everything else around us. So in the end, although change feels difficult when it happens, it's usually it's a great thing, right?
And any
I
thoughts?
just wanted to add, I agree that I think a very good idea is also to make these living labs, these pilot sites, being bigger and bigger and bigger. And actually in Denmark we're talking about that Denmark could be a living lab for a lot of different things because the country is not that big. And then you afterwards can move it around and get learnings from it to find out what is good and what is bad, what is working, what is not.
Yes.
So pilot sites is very important, I think.
I agree. And so thank you so much, all of you. There's more optimism than I've seen in years in the market, and these conversations are a big, big part of it. So thank you for joining me this morning. It's Carol Stimmel in the Engerati studio at European Utility Week 2015. Thank you.